Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bet the Edge. Thanks for watching on our NBC Sports YouTube channel or listening in audio form on podcast. It's V Money and the Well Capper. And today we're doing a Q&A. It's usually on Tuesdays, but we're moving it back here. And I have a lot of good questions for you, Drew. Before we get to the viewers' questions, my first one, if you had to name your own horse, racing horse, of course, what would it be?
Paolo Banchero. That's my go-to moniker for like circuit contests and stuff. Bank with the K. That would be a fun crossover of my favorite win in gambling with a horse that has like a fun name. So take Banchero to the take Paolo to the bank, and we'll give ourselves a chance at a Triple Crown and a Breeders' Cup. But I don't know that I'll ever get into horse racing, even if I do, at some point really cross over into, rarefied air when it comes to wealth. But that said, it seems like a very cool part of the sport to be, that tied to the, life and well-being of the animals, which is, it's enticing for sure.
Yeah, no, certainly.
What's your horse name?
My horse name? It would have to be like a meme of some sort, like you're not my dad. Like something like that would be like my horse name. Would be nothing clever at all. So yeah, it would just be solely someone to laugh at and be like, yeah, I want to put $5 on that horse. So that's how I would view it. But I like yours better. The Orlando Magic always find a way to get mentioned on this show. I don't know how it's done, but they do it. But do want to say thank you to everybody who tweeted us on Twitter and gave us a lot of questions. We got NFL, NBA, some tennis questions, horse racing questions, and more. So let's dive into it. First question is going to be from Paul at PT Bets on Twitter. And the NFL schedule releases this week. How do you think they're adjusting your season win total projections based on travel disadvantage? And are you using historical data to assess teams and coaches who are better than average at handling that disadvantage? Drew, take it away.
This is a really, really good and sophisticated question from Paul. I think in general, travel and rest disadvantages are probably overstated in terms of the schedule release, right? Like if you think about it, like there's a lot of people who thrive on creating NFL content, and we are among those. So I'm not pointing fingers here. And there's not much you can say about now we know what order the team's playing, because, before you get the schedule release, you know what teams are playing what teams. And so we already kind of know that teams like the Colts and the Bengals and the Jets, and there's a couple more off the top of my head that I haven't already thought of, where within division you have an advantage because you're playing a softer schedule than your divisional opponents. And, the sequencing is not going to change that. you have an soft, we know who has the easy schedules. We know the Falcons have the easiest schedule of anyone, regardless of what order. But the sequencing does tell you something. And in general, it kind of gives you a sense of, really like, who can get off the hot starts, who's going to have tough closes. And that can matter in terms of market entry for teams and futures in particular, right? So it doesn't in general, it doesn't change my win total expectations much. We'll talk about that in a little bit more in detail in just a second. But mostly knowing the sequencing kind of gives you an idea of entry point, exit point on given teams that you think, well, this team is good, but oh my gosh, their schedule is wildly imbalanced. They start, and vice versa. Sometimes with the vice versa, if a team starts especially difficult stretch and you have a coach that's beleaguered, and you have a general manager that's under pressure, and you have a team that's, or a quarterback who there's low confidence in, that can absolutely inform a win total bet. Because if you're starting cold, and you have a quarterback under pressure, and then you get halfway through the season, and they're like, well, we're 2-7 here. We're not going to the playoffs. We might as well kick the tires on the rookie, right? All of a sudden, then you have a very different, team rating than you would have otherwise for a team that was kind of priced in a win total of around 8.5 or something along those lines. So those definitely those thoughts that, can kind of push me beyond like, hey, we already have an under look on a team like the Steelers, we'll say. And we already know that the Steelers are not married to Russell Wilson. right? Like
Mhm.
he's probably going to start week 1, but if it doesn't go great through the first portion of the season, is he surely going to be the guy? No, they may kick the tires on Justin Fields, and I don't have an especially high rating on him either. They could very well find themselves in a position where if they have a tough start to their season, and it doesn't go well, then forget about winning 8 games. Like, you might be looking at alt unders there because, they just entirely pull the rug on the
Mhm.
2024 campaign. So I know that's not really a Tomlin thing, but that definitely, that type of scenario plays into sequencing for me.
Yeah.
Similarly, like there are certain kind of especially difficult stretches for teams that can play into how you would rate a team win total, right? 3 games in a row on the road, multiple trips from east
Yep.
to west that are not clustered in a way that they can stay across the country. And those type of difficult those type of difficult travel or rest disadvantages to me is treated more like a qualitative layer than it is like here is the true blue way to bake a number into it. Now, why would that be? Well, there were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that this stuff wasn't quantified well at all. And you could literally just pluck out, well, we have signal that says you underperform by 2.5 points by 5% win probability when you are on back-to-back road games early in the season, right? Like you could very clearly price that and take that out of your projection for how a team does over the course of the season. But for the most part, teams have gotten smarter to where it does not matter as much. It's much closer to like just a qualitative, soft angle. And I think in general, the as we go through the season and we look for spots to bet on or against teams, I'm mostly using the travel disadvantage or the rest disadvantage as a qualitative layer where I'm like, my numbers say I have an edge betting against a team. And oh, by the way, they're coming off a huge win on the road, and now they're on the road again. Like this is now, just a little bit more of a nudge in the direction where you already see you have a little bit of an angle. So I don't think anyone is going to specifically pick on travel or rest and get rich in the NFL these days because it is so widely captured by the market by the time you get to limits up. In general, I think for season-long win totals, it's much more of a qualitative layer as opposed to any type of quantitative number. And if you see a team that has bad travel, bad rest, and you already had an under on them, then shop for an alt under.
Mhm. No, I love a lot that you answered there, and I'll say that Alex Pepper had a similar question that you kind of answered a lot of things that he was asking as well. He wanted to know what are some of the first things y'all look for in the NFL schedule release, 3 road games in a row, rest advantage, etc. Thanks in advance. And that's a lot what you just spoke on. And I had 2 teams that I was going to mention that you kind of briefly hit too in different forms. But the Carolina Panthers last year, you mentioned having a younger quarterback. That team played on the road for their first 6 games before a bye week. That's a
Yeah.
terrible situation set up for a rookie quarterback. And then if you look down the stretch, November and December, they had 3 straight road games. That was a terrible setup for the Carolina Panthers in general to succeed this season. Then you look at a team like the Chargers, for example, where they came out of a bye week, and this team was alternating home and road games left and right. At home they go to Kansas City, at home go to New York, at home they go to Green Bay, at home and they go to New England. And it's how can you win when you're going across the country or halfway across the country and back week by week? So a lot of things you hit on are also what I look for, and why I may not be as invested in the futures market in the NFL opposed to other sports. I think that this creates obvious spots where you could put in your notes in your phone. Hey, from weeks 8 to 12, the Chargers are going to be traveling across the country and back 2 to 3 times in a month. And then you're going to know that this team's going to be fatigued. So you could attack them by fading them early or full game spreads. So that's kind of my mindset, which I feel like aligns. And, you've also helped me grow in this area when it comes to NFL handicapping. So anything that you want to add onto the NFL scheduling, especially since Galax Pepper had a very similar but still very good question.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with your general sentiment, which is it's less about one trip and more about cumulative fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there are other kind of fun wrinkles that now we look for, right? The Jacksonville Jaguars. They have now back-to-back games in London for the second straight year. Fun. And I don't know if you remember what happened last year, but they flew across the pond. They stayed in England for a whole extra week. They were very well adjusted to the time change. And the old Buffalo Bills flew into town, a little bit before the kickoff. And you know who slept through the first half and who was very sharp in the first half? The Bills slept through the first half, and the Jaguars were very, very sharp in the first half of that game. And that was a huge, swing in terms of a lot of the futures markets at that time. Now, ultimately, the Bills clawed back and won the division, got the 2 seed, and ultimately the Jaguars flopped because of injuries, but still at the time, like that was a massive swing in win probability. And so I'm definitely, first thing I saw today, the international games are out. Who's on the front end for the Jags and who's on the back end? Who loses their home game going to London? Who's losing home games by traveling internationally? That matters a ton. Sure, right? Like obviously, like if your home game is home field advantage, and who is it? Did the Bears lose a home game to the Jags? I think I don't have the final schedule in front of me. I've only seen leaks and rumors, but if you're the Bears and you could have had the Jaguars in I don't know, December in Soldier Field. That sounds a lot better than giving up that home game to go play in London, where they're very, very well supported and kind of very familiar with the travel wrinkles, and you are not. So that's an interesting kind of one off, and all of this stuff is really small edges, small angles, and nothing that I would say is like clear and obvious macro. There is usually some telegraphing that the NFL does. Right, that they think like certain teams are going to be, in the mix late. They'll put them in certain spots at the crunch time of the year, and that's kind of always interesting to me. Like, interesting. So they think this team is going to be good enough to have a sweep primetime game. Okay, interesting. They think this team is go Chiefs. Because good example last year. Like it felt like the schedule makers to a degree sat down and they were like, we're tired of the Chiefs getting the AFC Championship game every single year in Arrowhead. We're going to make this closing stretch very tough for them and stack these games with where their opponent has a rest advantage week in, week out, and they'll take some losses and they'll have to go on the road and do it. Well, they went on the road and did it. So that's, beside the point. But I think you can kind of look at the schedule in some of those instances and kind of gauge, okay, what is the NFL telling you about the way that they want sort of the fabric of the season to unfold, and who do they think is going to matter? I think last year, we got a good example, like putting the Ravens at the Niners on Christmas Day. Like, I don't think they just got lucky that they knew they had a suspicion the Ravens are going to be factors this year. And, we're going to send them to the San Francisco as, potential, Super Bowl sort of, matchup there. I think that's always kind of instructive and interesting just to gauge how the NFL feels about some of those teams. So, I like to look at what the high profile games are, particularly at the end of the year, and look for imbalance in schedule, and the rest of it is pretty much noise.
Yeah, I'm going to be jealous hearing you and Jay get to break down the NFL schedule when it does get released, because we are, as we're recording this, we are about 3 hours out until the NFL schedule gets released. So we are working on, a lot of what we've been hearsay so far. And, you already shared something about my Steelers possibly having Christmas Day home game against the Chiefs after they have a road game 4 days before that. So,
Yikes.
I mean, if that's true, I'll be purchasing Steelers tickets tonight for that game and selling on StubHub. So let me know if you need some tickets, everybody listening. That's my way to profit off the NFL schedule release, Drew.
I like it.
Heading over to another NFL question here, which this one I don't have a very strong take on, but I have a feeling that you may. Any thoughts on NFL Coach of the Year or Defensive Rookie of the Year? Thanks, Drew. Appreciate all your hard work. That is from Huntsman Hundo. at Hundo on Twitter. Bunch of O's.
Well, appreciate the kind note. Always appreciate everybody. Kind of the questions we get on this Q&A are always really, really smart, and I like this one especially because now is sort of the time you want to be thinking about this. Defensive Rookie of the Year is a little bit of it's not as well defined in terms of there is a rubric for how that award gets voted on usually. The only things I can tell you looking through the years past is it's going to be somebody who starts early in the season and contributes every single week. Like, it is very rare that Defensive Player of the Year goes to a guy who is a role player, not a non, somebody who's not an every down player, even if they are accumulating stats. If it is not a blue chip guy with pedigree, guy with a name, like, then it is going to be tough for you to break through in the mind of the voters just because you're a little bit of an unknown, right? Think about it in terms of, like, everybody that does work in the NFL and is going to vote on this stuff is they know exactly who Caleb Williams is. They've watched his tape. They know what to expect. They know the top receivers, right? Like, everybody's prepping for their fantasy draft. They know who's going to make a difference in these. Who we don't know? We don't really know what impact Quinyon Mitchell is going to have for the Philadelphia Eagles secondary, if he's going to start, how much he's going to play, because they have some vets there. And so, I tend to look for, is there an obvious guy, a name with pedigree who's going to be on a defense that surprises people, right? Because that's the other thing that people like to do when they vote for the Defensive Rookie of the Year. They like to find, man, we thought this defense was going to stink, but they're top 5. It's because this guy who they drafted, who we know his name, right? Like, that's sort of the that's the Chase Young for back in the day with the Commanders, or Washington football team at the time, I think, right? That Washington football team surprised everyone. They were a top 10 defense. It's all because of Chase Young, who's getting stats. He was almost a unanimous winner, right? Like, and honestly, I look at the pass rushers of this year's class, and I got a little bit of a yawn, a little bit of a little bit of a don't know that these guys are well known enough, and don't know if they landed in situations where they're going to be productive enough to warrant consideration, which makes me think we could be more in for like a Sauce Gardner type of year, where you just have a defense that makes kind of a true statement that they're for real, and it could go to a secondary player who just happens to have some either enough picks or enough of impressive performance as a rookie to kind of warrant the consideration. And if I had to pick one, I'm probably going with Mitchell. Arnold would be a second, kind of a one. That's a 1A, 1B between Mitchell and Arnold. I think those are your two pedigree corners, your shutdown corners in this class. And I think both the Lions and the Eagles could be viewed as taking big steps forward defensively this year, just because of everybody else kind of coming up and developing. So Mitchell would probably be my first choice and Arnold second choice. But even though even this is a little bit of a just kind of guesswork, because Defensive Rookie of the Year is tough. Coach of the Year is much more straightforward, and it is a crowded field usually every year. And I think the key for picking the right Coach of the Year is to get a guy who is going to exceed expectations. Right. And I know Stefanski won last year over DeMeco Ryans. So you could say, well, wait a second. DeMeco Ryans exceeded expectations more than anyone in a decade. Like, why didn't he get it? Well, last year was a very weird voting split. And I'm not 100% sure how we got to where we got. But, I think it is still a matter of you pick a guy whose team is expected to finish in the middle of the pack, or at the bottom of the pack, and not expected to win their division, that shocks the world and wins their division and or wins more than 10 games. And the higher they are seated in their respective conference, the more likely they are going to get consideration. And the guys that stand out as that type of rubric this year, Shane Steichen, surely with the Colts. I would say that, way down the board, Zach Taylor with the Bengals. The Bengals kind of storming into the AFC and getting a 1 seed with a healthy year from Joe Burrow and the soft schedule they've got, as seems likely or at least possible to me. if the Cardinals do anything good, Jonathan Gannon's name is going to get kicked around, because all of a sudden that team now has some true blue talent, and a healthy year out of Kyler Murray could be, enough to get them into contention in a weakish NFC. So those are the ones that sort of stand out to me. And I think, as we kind of continue to price and understand the teams with the most upside who are towards the bottom of their conference, we'll have a couple more names. But, I think you can pretty much toss out all of the guys expected to do well at this point.
Yeah, I was surprised to see Dan Campbell at 22-1 in Coach of the Year odds, but you say you expect them throw him out because they're expected to do so well and be a contender there. I love the Shane Steichen look at 14-1 for the Colts. That is actually my favorite bet. I'm not going to run it back on Jim Harbaugh just because, the Blue paid us out so well this past year, but I do feel like there's potential for him too. But Shane Steichen, definitely my favorite bet that you mentioned. I like the looks on the two corners too. Both of them were 11-1 odds for Defensive Player of the Year award. But overall, I think a lot of great breakdowns there. And being Coach of the Year, you have to try and think of particulars on how these guys could win. And the Zach Taylor angle of the Bengals having a 1 seed, having a soft schedule, that's certainly an appealing look too. That's someone that was not on my radar whatsoever. But we do know Zach Taylor, one of the best coaches in the NFL when it comes to second half adjustments, especially defensively. So I'll keep that one in my pocket as well. The next question, I'd love to hear your opinion on, Drew. I'm not going to spend too much time on, but AC at AC2 Fresh IV on Twitter said, thoughts on the Steelers over-under? And honestly, my guy, this one is pretty simple. The Steelers over-under set at 8.5. 9 wins would be a winning season. Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season. Why would you fade them now? I do get the breakdown of Russell Wilson joining his third coach, third OC in 3 years. Certainly cannot expect Russell Wilson to be, a all Pro Bowl caliber player in Pittsburgh, but I think we will work Justin Fields and Drew more than people think. I think we'll have maybe a 2-quarterback system going, or there'll be games where Fields plays more than we'd imagine. But yeah, he's certainly the answer. Russell Wilson, he's temporary. He's not our answer. Justin Fields is the guy we all wanted. So I'm not going to, go crazy on the over 8.5 wins for the Steelers. But if you were forcing me to play one, I certainly think they could still achieve 9 wins. I still don't think the Browns are a team worth being threatened. I think the Ravens may take a little bit of a step back. And as you mentioned, the Bengals, they have a lot to overcome from last year. So AFC North, I don't think it's solidified as there's one team that's going to take it the whole way.
Yeah. We're going to have to agree to disagree on this one, and we may have to make a friendly wager at some point on this, because I look at the Steelers. I look at their schedule in particular, their opponents this year, and finding 8 wins is going to be tough. Particularly if it's tough every year. They do it every year somehow.
They play up to their competition. They play down to the teams that suck. I mean, when they play the Cardinals, they're going to lose to the Cardinals, but they're going to end up beating the Bills somewhere. Not the Bills, but someone like that.
Yeah, because you have decent upgrades in the offensive line at this point. Right? Maybe like a flat out good offensive line. It's tough to say.
Yeah, no, their offensive line is going to be top 12 unit this year for sure.
Yeah, and I look at Arthur Blank and Russell Wilson, and I think, oh goodness gracious, we are going to get ourselves some seriously conservative offense out of this group. You look at the skill position group: wide receiver 1, George Pickens; Van Jefferson, wide receiver 2, Roman Wilson in the slot. This is not a good, talented pass catching group. And I don't know exactly what the split's going to be like between Harris and Warren, but you can look at that as a 2-headed monster, or you can look at it as 2 guys and no lead back. The defense is probably the different story. Like, the defense looks good. Minkah Fitzpatrick and, TJ Watt anchor, a really solid defense. And they did a nice job, I think, of kind of filling out the middle unit too. Didn't love the move for Patrick Queen, but you take him away from Baltimore, which is good, I guess. Well, I just look at him as overrated. I think he benefited so much from playing next to Roquan Smith, and now he gets to play next to TJ Watt. So maybe he's as productive. But yeah, I'm still not necessarily sold that he's a needle mover, and you know, the defense looks legit. I just worry
Yeah.
about you know, and maybe we live in a world in the NFL where trying to win a game 20-17 every week is a viable strategy, but it feels tricky to me because I feel like that was the Broncos last year, and while their defense was not as good as Pittsburgh's will be this year, their schedule was also a lot easier, and they still couldn't get there. So Russell Wilson's sort of the X factor, and you know, the fact that Justin Fields couldn't beat Russell Wilson out in like mini camp, like is not clearly like winning that battle right now, also spooks me.
Yeah, I'll be back at Steelers training camp this year to get a first-hand glance of what it looks like. And if you remember last year when we were talking heading into the offseason, I was going to Steelers training camp. I was saying the best quarterback in training camp thus far has not been Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett. It was Mason Rudolph. If you watched how last season ended up, that's kind of how it was. So hopefully the Steelers learn from their mistakes. If Justin Fields beats him out, he'll get that starting nod there. But I'll say I like a lot of what you said. I'll agree with. The receiving corps is definitely the worst part of the Pittsburgh Steelers right now, and it's going to be a ground game and defense, classic Pittsburgh Steelers football. But with home games against the Chargers, Giants, Jets, some road games against the Falcons, Broncos, Colts, Raiders, Commanders. I am not too worried about the schedule now. You know, Cowboys, Chiefs, Eagles, those type of teams. Of course, who we play in the AFC North are going to be contenders, but think the Steelers end up somewhere between 8 to 10 wins, which is not saying much because that's what they do every year, Drew. So we'll get a friendly wager going. We'll maybe some money, maybe a trip, maybe some food.
Ooh, yeah.
Maybe a puppy. I want a puppy. So, you know, whatever we got to do, we'll get it done. But if you guys haven't heard, the Olympic champion, Sydney McLaughlin, Leverone leads a star-studded crowd at the LA Grand Prix this weekend. Watch America's top track stars on Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern as they continue their run to the Summer Games in Paris, only on NBC and Peacock. And continue our Q&A. We got Birdman, spelled B-U-R-D, man, at Fan V Narcissist at Twitter. Drew, this one's for you. How are you handicapping the French Open versus Summer Olympics? Lots of variance in the futures markets.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So the reason that this question is relevant this year is because the Olympics, as you know, are in Paris. And you know what else is in Paris? This is the French Open. And you know what else? They are contesting the tennis at Roland Garros. So this is rare. It happened in London at Wimbledon. The last time we had an Olympic tennis contested on clay was in Barcelona back in 1992. So it's been a while. And I think the handicap of, player on a given condition shouldn't really change. There's no real reason to think that, this guy's played well on clay, but now he's representing his country. He's going to play even better, right? Like that's probably not, unless you're, at the tail end of your career and you're just looking for, one final, I have never accomplished Olympic gold medal, or you're in your home country, which I think Andy Murray and Martin Del Potro faced off, I think in 2012, on the grass. But I might be one Olympics off. But either way, unless you're kind of well established, the idea that you're going to leave it all on the red clay in order to get your country a gold medal is probably, it's more important to you from a financial standpoint and from a legacy standpoint if you're an up and coming player to win the French Open or to prep for the US Open, right? Those are kind of the bigger deals, I think. That said, the other things to know is women's side of things, it is what it is. Iga is still going to be a massive favorite to win gold, and she should be. It will be fascinating to see if she can double up at Roland Garros this year, and I would say I would put her odds likely that she does. The next kind of key question then is the men, where not number one, we have a French Open handicap right now where everyone who matters is hurt, which is crazy. And that's not going to be the case necessarily by the time we get to the Olympics. There'll be some guys who are on the mend. And so you could see a different shaped pool there where a player like Alcaraz is is correctly favored, as opposed to the French Open, where I think he is not correctly favored. And the other kind of key things to think about for the men's side for the Olympics versus the French Open is the French Open and every Grand Slam is best of 5, which means you have to win 3 sets, which means upsets are even less likely, right? And a Grand Slam is 128 players. So there's some soft early rounds for the high seeded players, whereas the intermediate guys have to go toe to toe with the grinders, guys playing well, qualifiers who are playing well, things like that. And so the path for the top is a little tougher in the Olympics, where you only have 64, and the qualification process is a little different, and the field is just a little bit better at that point, I think. So best of 3, more chaos, and I think you have to kind of soften your expectation that the favorites are really going to be able to kind of withstand some of the chaos of the Olympic draw. I think similarly, like, you're representing your country, you're trying hard, but if you have any sense that, man, nice sports, I think I might have a sports hernia here, like, you're not going to play through it and risk the rest of your professional season where you got to go and play and make money. So you could see some guys pull the ripcord if they are a little bit injured, but very excited to see what the Olympic tennis has in store shortly. And I would say that if you have futures markets available, I think wait until the French Open is over and there's been some blood in the water with the favorites who are hurt, and then come in on those guys for the Olympics after they've had a couple months to recover.
That's a good piece of advice there. And I want to give a shout out to Birdman. Good question there. That Drew always breaks down well when it comes to tennis. Love hearing Iga, Sabalenka, and Coco Gauff when I come on the show. Say they've made us some money, man. They've made me some money in particular. So I appreciate that. I also appreciate Andy Vate on Twitter at PundyVate, because this question is one that I think we all want answers to. What methods do you employ to avoid making tilty wagers or chasing losses, especially where live in-game or halftime wagers can blur the line between chasing losses, being on tilt, or sticking with your priors? Asking for a friend, I swear. Aren't we all?
You want to take this one first, or you want me to go and kind of describe my process?
I spoke on this in actually the past few episodes a little bit, because I think in the NBA playoffs particularly is a great time to be live betting. I think unders in general are really the looks. And I just was with a friend yesterday who was telling me, man, I keep losing these NBA same game parlays. I needed Nemhart to score 10 points and he got 8. I needed Aaron Wiggins to score 8 points and he ended up with 7. And it's like, you can be watching these NBA games and find out rotational pieces of guys worth fading, and the sportsbooks will try and close them after a certain time. For example, the Oklahoma City Thunder. If you've been watching Josh Giddey, this guy is not going to be playing more than 10 or 15 minutes down the stretch, because you can't have a guard on the floor like Josh Giddey along with Lou Dort, who cannot shoot. And Josh Giddey cannot play defense like Dort does. So that knocks his minutes out. So a guy like him, if you watch him play for 5 minutes, he scores 5 points like he did in game 4. Well, guess what? Let's take his unders, because this guy's not going to play much in the second half. And guys like Case and Wallace will knock down threes. So you can find players worth targeting that you can kind of just fade and take the unders. But honestly, if you're looking at overs right now, you need to be finding ways to hedge in game. And the overs you should be looking at are guys like Jalen Brunson, Nikola Jokic, Anthony Edwards, guys that are star players, because while I gave out Jalen Brunson game 5 over 33.5 points, his halftime line, Drew, was 44.5 points. If someone DM me and said, should we be hedging right now and taking the under on Brunson? I said, I don't hate it, but he has a capability of scoring 50. Brunson ended up with 44. So that person did make money if they hedged, So that's also the way I think of hedging out overs. Be prepared to take an under if your bet looks good, but also don't be afraid to take an over if your under looks good, because game 7, Drew, Cavs Magic. Oh my God. The live line was 181.5 and 178.5, and I lost the under 195.5. I was sick. But that's an angle you have to be okay with hedging out and giving yourself a wide enough middle opportunity. And I think that's what you should be doing if you're live betting, either fading the rotational players that are going to fall to pieces, or find out unders or hedge opportunities on your overs.
Hmm.
So that's my piece of advice. Drew, what say you?
Okay, so we'll take the specific example Andy brought up yesterday, which was the total in the Knicks Pacers game. And the key point, if you're going to make a halftime wager, and I guess I would just say you can talk to 10 very experienced players, and they will give you 10 answers on
Yeah.
whether the closing line is an indication of there's going to be gravity back to the closing line, or whether the
Uh,
halftime line itself represents the sharpest interpretation of what will happen from this point to the end of the game, because you've got a lot more information watching a half of basketball than you did
yeah.
before the game started. And so presumably the line reflects, number one, like that information you got, and then the historical context of what happens when a game is in the game state that the game is at halftime, right? And in yesterday's Knicks game, what was important there was you had a huge scoring first quarter. And the big question is, well, why? What happened? Was it shooting luck? Was it pace? Was it a mistake on pace? No. It was an inexplicable coaching decision by Rick Carlisle to put a guy who can't defend Brunson on Brunson. And so I'm watching live and I'm like, man, Carlisle, what are we doing here, buddy? And like, if I can see it, presumably he and the assistant coaches can see it too. And at halftime, they're going to go back to Neesmith instead of Nebhard.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, like you can take that information. You're like, okay, well, they tried something, it didn't work. They're going to go back to what did work. We should get more like the expectation we had in terms of pace, in terms of efficiency in the second half, rather than Jalen Brunson running amok in the first half. Like that was kind of my thinking and thought process, which is basically to say that the handicap pregame is still valid, and in fact, if anything, if there's been an inflation because of the game state, then we're getting even better entry point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, sometimes I'll look at, well, why was I so wrong? This bet is going to lose. Why was I so wrong? And you look at it and you're like, well, didn't count on that. Didn't count on that. That's going to keep happening. That's going to keep happening. The pace is much faster than I expected. The pace is much slower than I expected. The shooting is way off. And if shooting is really poor, there's not always going to be regression to the good. Right? There usually will be regression back to the kind of expected if it's hot, but it takes a certain kind of mentality of player and team that when the shots are not falling, to just keep trying. Eventually they're just going to say, okay, well, shots aren't falling today. We're down by 20, call off the dogs. Right.
Yep.
And so I think, kind of keeping all of that in, and having the right context is important. The last and kind of most important thing, and this has less to do with tilting wagers and more to do with chasing, do not up your stake. Like there are so few examples I can give you in life where you see something live and you think it means blank and the book hasn't captured it or the market isn't reflecting it, and it is a real edge. Most of the time it's not. You've tricked yourself into something. And so if you are like, man, I've lost $500 bets in a row, but I'm pretty sure this is going to happen, let's play $500, like kiss of death.
Yeah.
And like making a wager where you're up, so you're staking your more than you're comfortable with because you're trying to get back unlucky losses, like that is the fastest way to have to reload your bankroll. So yeah, I mean, I think I would put that in its own category and just say that, like, just kind of having a coolness where have some friends, have a group chat where you can just blast and be angry and get your emotional your emotions
Yeah.
out by talking to other players who are doing the same thing as you, as opposed to kind of betting into a book with emotion, which you will get you in trouble 100% of the time.
Yeah, I think that was probably the best piece of advice you gave out on the show so far, Drew. I definitely think that people should be, limiting yourself when it comes to the live betting, because getting back to even can certainly leave you in a much bigger hole than you entered yourself in if you are in one. Excuse me. But yeah, for what I was mentioning about the live halftime betting, I mean, this past week in general, There's a lot of books that offer, same game parlays, and you'll get, up to 10 or $20 back if you lose or whatever in a free bet form. And I use those often. And at halftime, if I lose by halftime, then I'll run it back at halftime, either with the things that were working out for me or the things that I'm seeing that work. And most of the time, I'm recycling that money and then making money the same day. So it really works for me in that way. And honestly, a lot of my same game parlays that have worked, at 12 to 1 odds, 20 to 1 odds, throwing $5 or $10 on those pays you out, 100, $200 every time, and you can definitely get your practice in that way. So yeah, don't chase and don't up your ante. Just yeah, be mindful of what you actually are doing in real time, and you'll be happier with your decision mentally and financially. But the last question of our Q&A before we talk about a little horse racing with the Preakness update we have here, Sports IRA on Twitter said Wolves send it to Game 7 question mark. Ooh, I did place Nuggets to win the Western Conference at -115 and to win the NBA Finals at plus
Oh boy.
275, Drew. So
Okay. So you're riding with
Minnesota,
the
you're
Nuggets.
going home, baby. You're going
Oh
home.
boy. I'm on the opposite side of both of those. So I don't begrudge you making those bets. You can ride the hot hand right now. The hottest hand ever that I can remember seeing was Jokic in third quarter, game 5. It was a little soul crushing for the Wolves, I think, the way that played out. And the Wolves were, kind of definitely handicapped by Anthony Edwards just playing a pretty poor effort from him. I would expect he takes game 6 and puts the Wolves on his back and is the offense. But the injuries to Cat are questions, that are swirling for me. The Mike Conley availability is a question that's swirling for me. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you want him in a replacement role, not in a starting role.
Yeah.
Kyle Anderson, you want his minutes not to have to go up to make up for Cat. So, there is some fragile stuff going on with the Wolves right now where a game 6 loss would not shock me. But I'm gonna say that Market's right, and there's better than a 50% chance that the Wolves force a game 7.
Yeah, I would like to see a game 7 so I could take an under and make my money back on a game 7 under, hopefully.
Yeah, we're in the same mind space there. Although we're not chasing game 7 unders.
No. I will definitely use my unit scale and just do what I got to do to make my money. But yeah, I've already let go of that game 7 loss. That was yeah, my brother was watching the game with me. I said, "Do you mind letting me vent this one out with you?" And he said, "Go ahead, bro, air it out." So I felt a lot better
Oh my god!
after I talked to somebody that I care about.
So many garbage points in the fourth quarter of that one, man.
Oh my god! Yeah. But we do appreciate all the questions, and I do have a small bone to pick because I subbed in with you last week. I subbed in for you last week, Drew, to talk to Jay. And Jay talked me out of taking the Nuggets at 16-1 to win the NBA Finals and 8-1 to win the West.
Wow.
So Jay, if you're listening to this right now, I'm coming for you. Like Nikola Jokic is coming for Rudy Gobert. I'm coming for you. So
the day they're eliminated, he'll be like, "Hey, I saved you money."
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, he'll like, "See, told you I was right." And I'll just like, "Yeah, whatever."
Yeah, 16-1 was a nice price. Yeah.
It was, but yeah. So, I mean, you could only make fun of yourself for not taking that type of price on the Denver Nuggets. So that was great talk, great conversations, great questions from everybody. So a quick shout out to Sports IA, Andy Veit, Birdman. We had AC as well as Huntsman, Hundo, Galax Pepper, and Paul. We appreciate all your questions. Everyone else who tweeted us as well. The second leg of the Triple Crown will be run on Saturday. You can watch the Preakness States at the Pimlico Racecourse. The action starts at 4:30 p.m. Eastern on NBC and Peacock. And Drew, you got a little update because Muth has been scratched. Saw your video on Twitter. Seems like big news. Break it down for us.
Massive news. Muth was going to run away with this thing, and now he is in the barn with a fever. It's rough, man. He was the best in class, and he was gonna, he was likely gonna win another Preakness for Bob Baffert. And I think the important part of this is that the odds for Mystic Dan are now gonna just implode. Like he's going to go off 2-1. I've heard like very reputable people say they think he's going to go off shorter than 2-1, which I'm like, oh goodness gracious, then he is a clear bet against for me. Mystic Dan does have the opportunity to ride the rail again and get on the lead, be kind of the dictating force of the race. But, he kind of ran out of gas and just barely eked across the line in the Derby. If he can come up with another effort like that on a 2-week turnaround against horses that are fresher, I'll pay to see it. So for me, it's I'm looking for the fresh legs to get it done. And the two that really stand out are the 8 and the 9. The 8 is a horse called Tuscan Gold. He's trained by Chad Brown. Chad Brown is notorious for identifying horses as 3-year-olds who are not ready to run the Kentucky Derby and keeping them for those additional 2 weeks to be spoilers for the Triple Crown. He did it with cloud computing. He did it with early voting. And I think he's going to do it again with Tuscan Gold. And the price is right. Like, you're going to get a decent price on this horse. I think his chances are better than 20%, which is what 4-to-1-ish, where he goes off, is probably going to imply. And so for me, it's 8 to win. And then, the other kind of, fixed odds darling is going to be an Imagination, which is the other Bob Baffert horse. It was easy. But Baffert is a money magnet when it comes to these big races. And people will just they'll do a 2-minute handicap. Oh, who are the train? Oh, there's a Baffert horse. Bet on the Baffert horse. And there's plenty of reasons why we can talk about it another day. But effectively, Muth was the clear choice of the Baffert horses, and Imagination is now the only Baffert horse in the race. So he's going to get pounded. He's coming out of the 9. He's going to have a tough time taking the lead on the rail. He's probably going to be 1 or 2 wide with the opening lead. And I don't have a strong opinion whether he's fast enough to hold the lead. I like Tuscan Gold's being able to kind of stalk a little bit and run him down. The big loser of the Muth Scratch was probably Catching Freedom. Catching Freedom was a hot horse at the Derby. He's running on a quick turnaround, and he ultimately, he's a closer. He kind of needed a hot pace, and now that Muth's not in the field, I'd be surprised if it's fast in the early going here. So probably going to have too much ground to make up to be a factor. But horse racing is insane. So for all we know, Catching Freedom wins. It's set up well, I think, for Tuscan Gold to show us something special.
I like that. Tuscan's Gold at 8-1. I like the breakdown there too with Chad Brown. That's interesting to hear his angle of attack there to try and win these. And then Imagination was 6-1 too. So I like that. Do any of those guys make it, or those horses, I should say, make it as your best bet for the show today?
No. I'm going to go a weird direction with best bet. You ready?
Yeah.
I teased it. I like Zach Taylor, Coach of the Year, at 25-1. The Cincinnati Bengals are 9-1 to be have the most wins in all of football. They are roughly 4.5-1, 4-1, 5-1 to be the number 1 seed in the AFC. If either of those things happens, Zach Taylor is going to be in the discussion for Coach of the Year. And all he really needs to do is Joe Burrow to stay healthy, and he's going to be knocking on that door. So if you want to try to get a better way to capitalize on the Bengals surprising the AFC this year in the regular season, I think Zach Taylor 25-1 is that way.
I like that look a lot. I would say my favorite thing I've talked about on the show today would have to be the Nuggets to win the Western Conference. I feel great about that one. I felt good about it when it was 16-1 and 8-1, but I feel even more good about it now. And I would say one thing I didn't speak on that we talked about last week that I remind you guys to probably hop on, that would be my best bet if we talked about the sport today, be Shohei Ohtani to be the home run leader in the MLB. If you didn't see Drew post a video of him hitting the Barry Bonds-esque home run, wow. Jeez. Yeah. Oh my goodness. That baseball was bruised, battered. That's a case. All right. But so I like Ohtani to lead the league in home runs, but you still get at between 3-1 and 4-1 at a few sports books, nice. Including BetMGM and FanDuel. So check those out. But Drew, it was a great show as always. Love the Q&As and being a part of it with you. Best of luck with the NBA. And I'm going to be in Cancun next week, so I will not see you. I'm going to be hanging out with Paulo Banchero
Nice.
Kevin Durant and company, as they got the summer off. So
And hopefully Luka
appreciate
Doncic
you.
as the Oklahoma City Thunder move on.
Yes, I would hang out with Luka Doncic, play some video games with him. You know, I saw him online a little bit there, saw this clip. So yeah, maybe we'll hang out with Luka Doncic next week, drinking some margaritas or something on the beach. But we'll see. Don't forget, everyone, check out NBCSports.com for all your fantasy and betting info. From the Well Capper and V Money, we appreciate you. From producers Dan and Adam, thank you so much for listening or watching on YouTube or audio form. Make sure to subscribe, like both. And we'll see you next time. Enjoy Drew and Jay the rest of the week. See you later.